And we are live.
Oh, my flaming hemorrhoids.
Yep. So, anyways, so
What if AI cuts that part?
it will for sure. Oh, they talked about hemorrhoids and how important it is to take care of them before they look like they're exploding out of your asshole. So, app accessibility is often not thought of.
No, but
especially when you first start
very
building apps.
few people think about it ever.
And it's kind of a crucial thing to think about because one, you don't want to take away your app experience from somebody that needs, maybe they're visually impaired or audioly. They have an auditory impairment. That's the word. Or it could even be, touching the screen, like all these different like impairments that people can have is where app accessibility comes in. And it's important to think about things like that.
It absolutely is. The concept in and of itself is straightforward and people think, oh, well, it's easy to make an accessible app. But one, they don't think about it from the get-go. Two, it can get really tricky to implement, especially as you dive into what are all the different problems that people can have. And three, it is something, it's like security. You need to think about it beforehand because accessibility isn't something you just staple on at the end and call it good. The same way that security isn't something where you just say, well, I'll download a security package to my app and I'm done.
And the thing is, you have a user experience with those options still that you have to fulfill, or no one will like using your app.
And so you have to think about those at every step of the way. And every new feature you make, you should really be thinking about, how is this going to work for a normal, unimpaired, average user?
Mm-hmm.
How is this going to work for a person with this impairment, a person with this impairment, a person with these needs, and have different tracks and try to keep it as consistent as possible without taking away the experience from anybody that you can. Exactly. Like sometimes it's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
Like video games are really hard to play by people who are blind and deaf.
Mm-hmm.
That is just something you can't accommodate, but you have to consider it and you have to see what you can do and kind of figure out who all you're going for and who you are making concessions for. And it's a lot more involved than we'll just figure it out later.
Exactly.
So what is app accessibility? App accessibility is looking at your target audience and trying to expand that as much as possible and make it available for as many users as conveniently as possible. I mean, that's really it.
So now, how about this?
Imagine I swear to God, if you're going to bring up a toy box again, I'm going to throw my computer.
Just hang with me. Imagine if you have a big toy box with all kinds of toys inside. Now imagine if some friends couldn't play with certain toys because they were too hard to reach or understand. That wouldn't be fair, right? Well, apps on phones and computers are like those toys. So app accessibility means making sure every app is easy for everyone to use, no matter if they have trouble seeing, hearing, or even touching the screen. It's like making sure all the toys in the toy box are easy for all your friends to play with. That way, everyone can have fun and no one feels left out. So, Ben, that's what app accessibility is. And I'm just glad I could help you explain that process for a 5-year-old.
I appreciate your valuable service. I'm gonna stuff you in a toy box. Okay, so as Jacob mentioned in his wonderful breakdown, there are a whole bunch of different accessibility needs that you're going to run into. There's visual needs, auditory needs, motor needs. For example, if your app requires speech, is a person able to speak?
Mm-hmm.
How are you going to handle people who are mute or deaf or, all of these different impairments, challenges? How are you handling those things. And you have to consider all of these different groups. So visual, auditory, motor, cognitive, the list goes on.
So yeah, it can be as easy as increasing font sizes for like visually impaired, right? It could be as easy as not having like background music for someone that has like auditory issues. You might just have
text to speech is a good one.
Yeah, text to speech.
I mean, a lot of devices will have that built in.
Yeah,
but you want to make sure that whatever platform you're deploying to has that.
If just like increasing text size isn't enough, you would do text to speech, right? And a lot of phones like are built to do that. You just have to make sure you support it in your app so it knows to do that.
Yeah,
or it knows how to do that.
And I mean, even for websites, that there are tons of accessibility options, tons of it is supported, but on average, web developers don't think to put those things in, and they ignore them because, well, I don't need them and I don't think about it. So I don't put in things like the ARIA labels or alt text or any of that stuff or speech reader friendly.
It's almost like it comes down to laziness though, because it isn't hard to add a lot of that stuff.
At a certain, like, I hesitate to call it laziness.
Yeah.
It's just an awareness problem.
Yeah, fair.
Because, I mean, no, it doesn't take a lot of effort to throw it in there, but if you don't know what this thing is for or why it's important, then you're not going to think to do it. And when you're in a rush, like from the developer's side of things, if you're in a rush, you have to get this page done, client is demanding it, gotta go, you're on a tight schedule. The last thing on your mind is, how is a person going to access this website with this list of problems? Hey, I should really think about the accessibility issues. You're just trying to deliver to that client so they'll calm down and everybody's happy. And it's more of a future problem than, hey, I need to consider this right now.
Right, exactly. That's true.
And I mean, yes, that does come to bite you because, I mean, look at Shopify. There was a movement like a year or two ago where a bunch of people were going through and finding a whole bunch of mom and pop stores that were going through Shopify or whatever, finding ones that were out of compliance with accessibility regulations and suing the crap out of them. And they had no idea that it was even a thing.
Right. Yep. Yeah. I think that, like, when you hear situations like that where people assume Spotify keeps them set up, right? So
Shopify, like, you mean?
What did I say?
Spotify.
Oh yeah, Shopify. People assume Shopify is giving them a product that works for everything, and they shouldn't have to think about things like that. And that kind of does come down like as an ethical responsibility of like the app developers for that platform.
Yeah. Because
they should have that stuff figured out and fixed. And like, it's understandable if they didn't know and it happened once or twice.
Well, and this is also a danger. I'm not going to say that American companies and American developers don't fall out of compliance too, because they do all the time. But it's also tricky if you go overseas or something to hire developers to make it for you for cheap, or if your company's based in another country, because they don't have the same regulations. And so they don't care.
So it is important to understand why you're doing it. One, you don't want to leave people left out. Yes. You want your users. You want them to be happy.
And that's like the intent behind the law. It's not a, hey, you got to do this.
It's just a law that has gotten abused.
Yes.
And obviously that just happens in any kind of like free capitalist society.
Yeah. And I mean, with Shopify, I think maybe some of the people that were upset were genuine. But like a lot of things in our society, a lot of it was just straight up predatory.
Right. Like you have your like sick little attorneys just being predators and making a quick buck.
Yep. And so they were preying on people who had no idea, who didn't even think about this thing. They thought Shopify was protecting them, but technically somewhere in the user agreement, it wasn't protecting them, and they had no idea. And they get slammed with, hey, you got to give us all of your money or shut down your store kind of thing.
Yeah. Oh, we'll sell for 50 grand.
Yeah.
You know? Like,
so I think a lot of it was predatory, but it's something that people need to be aware of.
Yep.
And it is important. And the intent is always, we want to provide a great user experience. And there are tons of examples of people providing great accessible experiences just because they can and they want to, and they want to make sure that it's a comfortable experience for as many people as possible.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also something that gets left by the wayside a lot, and
For
it's
sure.
not necessarily on purpose.
Yeah, it's something I never thought about really until like HGA and like perfect form,
Mm-hmm.
because I never really was in control of my own products. And then when you are, you start realizing it. And then you hear horror stories like Shopify stores just being sued for like their checkout process not complying properly and things like that. And then you're kind of like scared and you go overboard and you have to figure out all these things like, well, why did they get sued? And you have to figure out and go down all these rabbit holes of things so you can comply.
And it's a lot.
Yeah.
And anything that we say here
We
is not legal advice.
No, yeah. Don't take legal advice. Just know that you need to figure this stuff out.
Yeah. It's something you need to be aware of. And if you have questions, find a good lawyer and talk to them to make sure that you're in compliance with things.
Yeah.
Because depending even down to what state you're in, it can change.
Yeah.
And so you want to make sure that you're in compliance with whatever you need to be in compliance with. We're just talking about the overall idea and some of the challenges and what we can do to kind of alleviate some of the pressure.
Yeah. I mean, I like to talk about more like the positives of supporting app accessibility. Because like, yeah, the lawsuits, it's real negative. People are scared of that kind of stuff. But it's more about just having an app that is like awesome and usable by way more people now. Because
why would I not want my product to be used by more people, my game to be played by more people, and for everybody that's using it to have a good experience?
Yeah. Well, so like, what are benefits of an app that has good accessibility?
I mean, the obvious one is it reaches a broader audience.
Yeah.
If you are excluding people, even by omission, from using your app, if you fix those problems, you reach more people, you've got more people using it. And the people that you are helping serve by giving these accessibility options, they are absolutely delighted by it. Because, you know, when most of the apps in the world aren't doing these things for them, and suddenly they find a good, high quality app, product, whatever, that is doing it for them, they love it and they're happy with it, and it grows your audience and they share it and you get more visibility.
And now you're like a positive brand image and reputation because you care. You put in those extra little details just to make your app accessible to everyone.
And I mean, this is something that a lot of games have been doing recently. Games have not been known for accessibility because there are certain requirements. To play the game, you have to be able to use a controller kind of thing. And there are a lot of companies coming out with accessible controllers and assistants and ways to do things. And one game recently, Final Fantasy 16, got a lot of credit because they actually they gave options in the game modes inside of the menu to make the game more accessible. And it allowed for you to simplify gameplay, to automate a lot of the gameplay if you needed to for accessibility reasons. So rather than, hey, you got to do a whole bunch of complex inputs and move your fingers really fast, you could one tap a button and have it do it for you so that more people could play and enjoy the rest of the game if they couldn't have that part of the experience. Yeah,
which is awesome, right? Because like you said, it's not common in games, and for them to go the extra mile to make it a standard is pretty cool to see.
Well, and it's a really good lesson on a good way to do it. Because what they did was they looked at, here are the parts of the experience that we can't compromise on of, hey, we've got storyline, hey, we've got this stuff. And they looked at each individual part and said, what out of this list can we make more accessible? How can we make the rest of this attainable for somebody that can't do this thing or this thing or this thing? And that's where the one button play came in, was, well, we'd rather they see the story, play the game, and feel like they're interacting with it than not play the game.
Yeah.
So we'll give them a way to play the game if they're incapable of using a controller.
Yeah. Which is awesome.
And whether it's for a game, whether it's for an app, whether it's for a website, that's what you want to be doing. Is sometimes there's just no way to win.
But I was also going to say a bonus to that is like just the potential increase in revenue now.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Because now people that used to not be able to play video games are now interested in your video game.
Yeah. And they build that loyalty because they know that you're trying to help them.
Yeah.
And you see them, and that's a big thing when we started talking about this. A lot of the times it's just an awareness issue of you don't know that you need to be putting these things in. You don't know about all these different diseases or impairments or whatever it is. And so you don't know to even think about adapting to those.
Yep, exactly.
And that awareness helps bring in customer loyalty, because in the future, they're going to be expecting, hey, this company is aware of my issues and they're working around them.
Yeah. And like, what are like just some really common accessibility features that are easy to implement for web?
Super easy ones are things like screen readers, voice commands, and text resizing, like you already mentioned.
Yep.
Because most operating systems, like on your phone or your computer or whatever, have those built in. It's just a matter of making sure that your product can interact with it properly and that everything is working. So that can be part of your testing pipeline. When you want to have text screen readers or voice commands or whatever working, you throw that into your pipeline, into your checklist of this is the stuff that we need to test. And it's really easy to add. It's not a big feat at all. Another big thing is user-friendly designs, because we all like the big, complex, pretty designs that are everywhere on every website and, every app, every web app. Everybody's looking for complex and beautiful. But you also want to make sure that you've got a good, accessible user design. Because if somebody has a visual impairment, sometimes the complex designs are too much. If they've got epilepsy, then you definitely don't want things flashing on your screen.
Right. Or even like color blindness or whatever, like colors could mesh together and they can't see.
Yep. Everybody likes all these pretty gradients, and here's text that is just ever so slightly hinted
and
above
it disappears,
here,
right?
And it just disappears for them.
Yeah.
And
we're not saying you have to take that away.
No.
You just need the accessible, a different version.
Well, I've even seen websites that have toggles for different features on their website of,
like you
demo
turn
pages,
off
they've
animations
got
and things.
Yeah, they've got demos of, here, click this toggle for dark mode and light mode. They do the same thing, but they've got it for different accessibility levels of, hey, make my text high contrast.
Yeah, exactly.
And you can do that, and then it outlines things and puts heavy contrast in there, where before you had this beautiful, sleek, modern design, and you still mostly have that. It's just slightly altered to make it so somebody can still do what they need to do.
There's so much that goes into this, and if you just want like some good like tips and resources to like where you even get started, like, well, what is good for my product? Because what's good for your product might not be what everyone does.
Yeah, there is no one size fits all approach.
But like the best thing I can do or recommend is like apps that you love using every day. Start digging through their accessibility options and settings and see how they interact and react. Do they not do anything, or do they do awesome stuff that you never knew was there? Like when you start paying attention, you start seeing things that other companies are doing, and you'll get some really great ideas. Not to mention, like, just Google app accessibility and you'll start seeing all these creative ways that you can integrate all these extra features to make your app more usable for anyone that's impaired with anything.
Yeah, for sure. Something I kind of want to talk about are some of the common challenges that you run into when you're trying to make your product more accessible. Because there are a lot of potential challenges, and there's an endless amount of different types of impairments and different types of issues that people have that make it harder for them to use products, especially in a digital setting. Because Braille doesn't work too well on most phones.
Yeah, it just doesn't pop up.
It just doesn't feel right.
How cool would that be? That'd be really cool.
It would be, actually. But just a few of them. The biggest one is awareness. Like, I'm new to app development. I have a product idea. How do I find out what I need to be looking for to begin with? Probably the best place to start with that is, you could always Google most common accessibility issues or any of that stuff. But just go off of those categories that we mentioned before, which, and go off those categories we mentioned before and think about what are some common things that I can think of that come to mind. And if you know anybody who has any of those impairments, involve them and be like, hey, can you tell me more about what's going on with you? What about your condition, about whatever it is? Mm-hmm. Because I'm trying to design this product, and involve them in it. Because awareness is the first step. Like I mentioned with Shopify and all that stuff, it wasn't malicious.
Right.
In most cases, it wasn't a screw blind people kind of thing. It was, they didn't have awareness that they, one, needed to implement anything. They didn't know Shopify wasn't taking care of them, or whatever, what the situation was on a situation by situation basis. Maybe it was plugins, whatever.
Yeah.
But they didn't know they needed to be handling this. And if you're not aware of the problem, you can't fix it. So start with the basics of those categories and then go from there and think, what do I need to be building around, and what options do I have for my product? And that kind of leads into the idea of testing limitations, because it can be really hard to test for accessibility issues.
Yeah, like, am I doing this right? Like, well, it's harder to find testers that are going to be
that are going to fit that.
Yeah, because now you need multiple impaired people from different aspects: visual, auditory, whatever, cognitive, motor. Like, so now you've made it more difficult.
Yeah, and that can be a really tricky part. And that's one of the reasons why it's important to think about, do I have anybody that I know, or even is just an acquaintance, who has this type of problem? Because you can involve them in the testing. You can make special accommodations to make sure that they're able to test your product and make sure it's working right for at least them. And even if it's just close, so you have a general idea of, is it kind of working? That's better than nothing.
Right, exactly. And these are things you can tweak over time too, because you're probably not going to get it perfect the first time.
No, nobody gets it perfect the first time. Another big thing is, like we talked about, balancing your user interfaces. It's probably best to try and make things the most accessible as possible by default. But you can also add toggles and accessibility options in some menu somewhere to help with that.
For sure.
And you want to make sure that your user interface is still beautiful, but usable for as many people as possible. And the last one is probably language and localization. With that, a lot of people usually build for whatever language they are originally in. And most American app developers start out with, we're building it in English and maybe Spanish. And then they kind of stick to that, and they don't think about accommodations for other languages, character-based languages like Mandarin, Chinese, where you've got all these little symbols.
And reading direction. And,
yeah.
Like, we did a whole episode on this, on app localization, which wasn't that long ago.
No.
I want to say like episode 25.
Somewhere
the only reason I know that is because I just made a reel for it. Otherwise, I would have no idea. But app localization is so important.
Yeah, and the important takeaway for all of this is not, hey, we got to make a whole bunch of specific changes. But as you are architecting out your product, as you're building your app, you want to make sure you have frameworks in place and systems in place, and that you're building things in such a way that you can make these accommodations. And we've talked about design patterns before, and that's where a lot of these design patterns kind of shine, like the strategy pattern. If I've got a strategy pattern going on for all of these different components of my app, then I can make changes and make accommodations for
you just stack them on top,
any accessibility needs, and just make it an option.
Yep.
where if I hard coded everything and I did things super tightly coupled and, just went ham and banged out a product in a week,
Right.
that wouldn't be a part of this. And it would be really hard moving forward to undo that and make accessibility accommodations.
Right. Now, don't get us wrong. If you're like prototyping and just trying to get a version of an MVP out, this might not fit into your timeline and skill set, but it is something you want to think about when you get past that stage.
Well, that's the difference between an MVP and an actual product.
Correct.
People get focused on the MVP and they say, well, I have a minimum viable product and this is the core and heart and soul of my app. And this chunk that I made
is only going to be built on.
And it's the foundation and everything must come from this.
Wrong.
The MVP exists to test out, hey, is this viable? Is this a thing that I actually want to build?
Is there a market fit?
And in all reality, you're going to get your MVP done. And as attached as you get to that, and as much as it is your baby,
it's going to be completely rebuilt.
You're probably going to trash it and rebuild from the ground up. Like you've got your MVP running. Great. That'll hold your business over kind of. While over on the side, you're building the actual thing.
And now like some like really good examples that everyone probably uses and doesn't realize how amazing of tools and apps they are. You have your like Google Assistants, your Siris, your Alexas, all these like voice command things that can control your entire device.
Yep.
Is so powerful. And right there, that is like a super accessible tool. And so like just thinking about examples like that. And when you start like thinking about this topic, you're going to start digging through apps and seeing what they do too.
Yeah.
And you're going to just become more aware and have more ideas to how to handle these.
For sure.
cases.
And you always want to be looking for that inspiration.
Yeah.
Because you can piggyback off of amazing things that other companies have poured millions of dollars of research into on what's the best way to do this. And especially for like a small indie startup kind of environment, that's the best thing to do.
Yeah, you have to.
Because you don't have the budget to say, hey, I'm going to go spend $50,000 on an accessibility study for my app. You just find something that's similar and you say, hey, what did they do and what bases does this cover?
Exactly.
App accessibility is really just about broadening your reach, making accommodations for the people who need it, and just focusing on building a good, positive experience for as many people as possible.
You want everyone to be able to play with the toys in the toy box.
Exactly. You and your toy box.
Boom, boom.